CNN's Erin Liebman joins us now live from St. Petersburg. So, Erin, what's the latest on the investigation? What exactly are they looking at in terms of evidence, and what leads do they have?
We haven't gotten a specific answer on who they've narrowed this down or who they believe is responsible, that is to say Russian officials of the National Anti-Terrorism Committee. The two leading suspects, if you will, have been the Chechens, who carried out a series of attacks in the early 2000s and beyond, even as late as 2013, but there hasn't been an attack like that from Chechen separatists in quite a number of years. The second leading theory is ISIS. They famously bombed, or at least claimed to bomb Metrojet, the Egyptian flight, or rather the Russian charter flight over Sinai that killed everyone on board. Those are the two leading theories at this point, and investigators have made it clear that that could be the direction they're looking at. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said they're not ruling anything out yet, certainly including terrorism as part of that investigation. So we're waiting for more information as that continues. Meanwhile, Russia has declared 3 days of mourning, beginning with today. It is worth noting the station here, and this is Sanaya Square. The attack happened between this station and the next one. The station has reopened, and we've seen people coming in and out of the station here behind me, many of them stopping, pausing, and taking a look at the memorial here that has been growing ever since yesterday afternoon as we near the 24-hour mark since this attack. A very similar memorial at the next station down the road. That's the Technological Institute station. That is where Putin paid his respects late last night after this attack that killed 11, wounded dozens more, and many remain in critical condition. So we expect these memorials to grow, the tributes to grow, condolences coming in from all over the world. President Donald Trump even offering his condolences and his help in terms of finding who's responsible and bringing them to justice as we wait for more information on which direction the investigation is moving. John?
And Erin, what has been the security response, not just in St. Petersburg, but also across Russia?
We've certainly seen an increase here in St. Petersburg. There have been police going in and out of the metro stations here behind me. And we expect to see that. As you pointed out, there is a concern of a crackdown now, that whoever is held responsible for this, the Kremlin could respond by cracking down on anyone they see as responsible, or anyone linked to that. And that is one of the concerns leading forward, and that's something we'll keep an eye on here.
Erin Liebman live in St. Petersburg. Thank you for the very latest. We'll have more on this right now. Joining me now from Seattle, Washington, Global Fellow for the Woodrow Wilson Center and former CNN Moscow Bureau Chief Jill Doherty. And here in Los Angeles, former FBI Special Agent BobbyChacon. Bobby, just first to you, we heard from Erin there that they're working very quickly to essentially return everything to some kind of normalcy. The train station has, in fact, reopened. At this point, how important is that?
Well, I think in a lot of terrorist attacks, it's very important for the government to return things to as normal as possible, as quickly as they can. And I think that it inspires confidence in the government and the government's ability to kind of keep things moving and protect its people. And I think that, you know, if one objective of terrorism is to create chaos in our societies, then the government's response of moving things as quickly back to normal as possible would be an attempt to defeat that objective.
Are you concerned, though, that they rushed this, that they could have missed some crucial evidence along the way?
Well, that depends. I mean, these crime scenes can be very time-consuming, and they have to be done very methodically. You know, what happens on the ground, sometimes it depends on the logistics of the system. You may be able to get things moving back quicker if you can get, you know, manpower down there to prosecute the scene quickly. It's been almost 24 hours. You know, in a physical crime scene like this, things can be done fairly quickly, especially overnight when it's empty and your crime scene teams can be in there working without being interrupted and stuff. So I don't think that's too quick a period of time to begin to reopen things.
Okay, Jill, it seems there are two main suspects here, ISIS or an ISIS-related group and retaliation for Russia's military intervention in Syria, or the other usual suspect, Chechen militants. Do you have an idea which would be more likely, and could it be a combination of the two?
Well, it could. I mean, I think in both cases you're pointing at Chechnya, but I think that second scenario could be a little bit more possible, because after all, this is the thing that President Putin has been warning about, and there has been concern that those fighters who are becoming very militant, not only in the beginning, Chechnya was kind of a breakaway republic, but it became very Islamist and much more radical. And some of those people, as the Syrian war was beginning, moved into the Middle East and began fighting there. In fact, there are thousands of them fighting in Syria. The second language after Arabic, indeed, is Russian. So they're a significant group, and the fear was that they, having been radicalized and really almost professionalized by that time in Syria, would then come home and carry out attacks in Russia. So that would be very worrisome, and it would fit the kind of ISIS international terrorism theory that President Putin has been talking about before, that is, again, their concern. And it makes it, John, I think, easier for him to make that proposal or pitch, as he has been, to President Trump and to the West. Let's get on board. Let's fight terrorism together.
So, Bobby, if you were doing this investigation, who would you be looking at right now? Who would be on your list of suspects?
Well, I think that your report earlier, I think, is correct. I think the two main groups are obvious, the Chechen separatists and ISIS. I think that, though, now you may have a hybrid of those two groups kind of coming together and working together. As an investigator, the first thing that's missing right now from a pure ISIS perspective is the claim of responsibility. Last year, when two ISIS operatives attacked the police officers on the outskirts of Moscow on a highway station, one of the first things that was released was the video where they claimed allegiance to al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, and to ISIS itself. And that's a hallmark, as we even saw here in San Bernardino, that's a hallmark of an ISIS attack. It's one of the things that's kind of missing yet for me to totally put this on ISIS at this point in time.
Jill, it seems this attack at St. Petersburg, it happened after what appeared to be a fairly long period of relative calm, at least in terms of domestic terrorism in Russia.
Yes, that's true. I'm not quite sure what to ascribe that to. Obviously, the Russian authorities have been able to move the terrorists pretty much out of Chechnya, but they went into surrounding areas, Dagestan and other parts of the Caucasus, and then, as I said, moving into Syria. But then in Syria, the Russian government had, as we all know and have been reporting, have been carrying out a lot of attacks, air attacks, and helping the Syrian army. So again, those people are being pushed in the opposite direction. So there is a bit of movement back, it appears. And again, this is surmisal until we know exactly what happened. But that's entirely possible that they are now moving back to their homeland.
And we heard from Garry Kasparov, the chess champion and Kremlin critic. He tweeted out, "Tragedy in St. Petersburg. Once again, unknown terrorists perfectly timed to serve Putin's political agenda. Forget protest, back to fear." Okay, now, so conspiracy theories to one side, Jill. Is there any real suspicion about the timing of the attack? Could it be used by the Kremlin as a pretext for a crackdown, on what has been a growing protest movement over the last few weeks?
Well, Garry Kasparov and others are really enemies of President Putin, and it's very hard to say. I mean, that is a charge that they make, but can you really prove it? That has been a charge right from the beginning. Remember, a long time ago, back when I was in Moscow, that some of the early attacks, the apartment building attacks, which were pinned by some of the opposition to the Kremlin on the Kremlin, but it was never really proven. So I think you're going to hear those theories, whether or not they're true. Russia is a place with a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of ideas swirling around, and this is not a particularly stable time.
So Bobby, all this to one side, what sort of crackdown, what sort of response would you expect to see from Russia's security services?
Well, I'm not sure. And the reason I would decide or lean against it being a pretext is because I don't think President Putin or Mr. Putin actually needs a pretext. I think if he wants a crackdown on his people, he's shown in the past, a tendency to be able to do that without any kind of pretext. So I'm not sure this was a pretext. I mean, ISIS has been verbally and pretty aggressively saying that they're going to come after Russia. There was one attack last year on the police officers. I think there was an arrest in November of 5 potential ISIS fighters planning an attack in Russia. So I think ISIS has been stepping up their interest in carrying out these attacks. So I'm not sure I would expect a crackdown based on this event. I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I think if Mr. Putin wants to commit a crackdown on his people, he's going to do it no matter what.
Yeah, fair point. Finally, we heard from the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. He sent his condolences in a tweet. My thoughts are with the victims of St. Petersburg metro explosion and their families and loved ones. Many leaders around Europe, they sent a similar message. But what was notable, the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, it was not lit in the colours of the Russian flag. There was no tribute like the one after the attacks in London and Paris. Similar story in Paris with the Eiffel Tower. It remained normally lit. Same in London. So, Jill, what does that say now about relations between Moscow and the rest of Europe?
Well, it's a pretty sad commentary. You would have to say, regardless of the reason, people have died. But this is a very tense political time. And that's one of the problems here, even in the United States, you know, where you have President Trump, who has said and agreed with President Putin that he wants to work together against terrorism. He did call, in fact, the Russians noted he was the first, I think the first Western leader who called after the attack to express his condolences and also offer support. So, but the problem is this issue of Russia interfering in elections in the United States or in Europe, the sanctions, all of that has made this issue very sensitive, almost toxic. So you're getting a very heavy political overlay on this, which is really a terrorist, or apparently a terrorist act.
Okay, Jill, thank you so much. And also Bobby as well. Jill Doherty there in Seattle, Bobby Chacon here in Los Angeles. Very much appreciated.